Former Georgia quarterback. You now see him on the SEC Network and also hear him on Sports Talk Radio over there in Atlanta. He's with us on the Pepsi Hotline. Some clock smack to bring you in here. Hutson, we hope you're doing well today.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. You'd be surprised how much this dead clock that doesn't even work behind me, how much attention it gets. When I do coaches calls, I've done coaches calls this year. I'd probably say 2 or 3 coaches calls. I sit in this chair with this clock that only works, is only accurate twice a day behind me. And they say the same thing. They're like, is that clock working? Is it not working? It's my wife. She decorated the whole room. So
we want to talk some quarterbacks with you because this quarterback portal is absolutely crazy. But let's start with the Georgia Bulldogs moving forward to Michigan. What is the biggest, in your opinion, Hutson, the biggest hurdle for Kirby Smart to pick up the pieces here and jump to have this team prepared mentally for Michigan after that disappointing loss to Alabama?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest hurdle, not to not answer your question, but, I think the biggest hurdle is just kind of confidence offensively. I mean, and defensively. I mean, it was not a great outing by any stretch of the imagination for Georgia altogether. There's, you look at the defense and you go, holy cow, this was a defense that was dominating all season long, and then they just got picked apart. And their defensive line, which has been so good, got 0 sacks and couldn't get any pressure. And then offensively, it's kind of the same theme and same problem that it's really kind of always been under Kirby Smart, which is when they play with a lead, they're one team, but when they play from behind, they really struggle to play catch up and play from behind and kind of have a third gear offensively. And any game that really gets into the 30s does not favor Georgia. So, I think it's just a matter of, stylistically, that doesn't matter. That doesn't worry me so much with Michigan, because I think it's going to be a low scoring game. It's more about, man, if you see Alabama again in part 2 of that rematch and that game gets into the high 30s, 40s, can you go punch for punch? Right now, I've got my doubts.
We know a lot of Georgia fans, and I think they were in shock after the first meeting last week. And I think they've got hope that there will be a rematch and they can win that one. But for whatever reason, if Kirby lost to Nick again after having what was deemed maybe a generational defense going 12-0 in the regular season, if he was to lose twice in one season to Nick, what is the narrative coming out of that game?
Well, the narrative, accurate or not, will be, Kirby Smart's never going to win a national title until Nick Saban retires, right? I mean, that will be the narrative. And he'll be, I think if he loses to him again, he'll be 0-5 at that point to Nick Saban. So, there's not a lot of people having success against Nick Saban. And this is where I try to talk some logic and Georgia fans off the cliff, because, we this week heard from a lot of Georgia fans here in Atlanta, and some are like, oh, we need to have that conversation about Kirby's job status. And I'm going, what are you smoking? Like, where do you get your logic from? Because, if you haven't checked, like, what do you think Georgia administration is going to do? Say this to Kirby, you know what, Kirby, you're in your mid 40s and, you're 0-5 versus Nick Saban. So it's about time we have that conversation with, your jobs like that. So I will say most Georgia fans don't feel that way, but there's a nutty section of every fan base. But, I do. I think if Georgia was to hypothetically lose to Alabama again, the narrative will be that, Nick Saban or Kirby Smart will never be able to get past Nick Saban until he retires.
Kirby Smart has seen what it's like. He even did it himself, to have a coach become a head coach at a Power 5 program during a playoff run and that guy hang around. Do you think he learned something from his experience as an assistant at Alabama, seeing it happen with himself and with an offensive coordinator and all of that, to where he said, okay, Dan's going to hang around with us and help out, but I'm going to appoint somebody else to be coordinators of the defense? Is that a learned trait, or is that just, or maybe a little of both, of having Will Muschamp on your staff, that you can make that move and take the coordinator away from Dan Lanning?
Yeah, I just think it's smart when you're in that position. There's not a lot of programs that can pretty much look at it every year. Clemson, Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, to name a few, where you go, okay, people are going to try to come poach our assistant coaches pretty much every year. And so if you're a head coach, much like Coach Saban has done, you got to be a bit ahead of that and have a succession plan. And I think this goes back to last year where, Dan Lanning, I think a lot of Georgia fans will tell you, like, they're not surprised that, he got a head coaching opportunity. A lot of people could see that coming for the past 2 years. And I think Kirby Smart absolutely could have seen it coming from a mile away. And so he went out last year and added Will Muschamp as an analyst. And then all of a sudden a spot opened up in the middle of the year. And now he's one of the 10 assistant coaches. And, he's been there and he's in the building and he's learning the scheme, and a lot of the same verbiage and schematics and stuff has carried over between those two guys anyways throughout their careers. So you're right, though. I mean, it is a very Nick Saban type thing. It's a very, Kirby Smart's had 4 open coordinator vacancies since he's been at Georgia. 3 times he's promoted within. So he's had success with that. And that's on both sides of the ball. I just think that it doesn't always mean it's going to guarantee a hit and be a success story. But when you've got a guy in the building, learning the scheme, building relationships with the players, I think most times you'd rather promote that guy from within.
Hutson Mason is with us, former Georgia quarterback, 680 The Fan and Atlanta SEC Network. He's on the Pepsi hotline. Bo Nix is in the transfer portal. He's joined there by an entire football team. I mean, it is Spencer Rattler. Zach Calzada is there now. Keaton Slovis is now there. Max Johnson, Miles Brennan. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. If you're Brian Harsin in Auburn and Bo Nix is there, is that where you look for a guy? Do you think you've seen TJ Finley? Is that a good idea for Brian Harsin? Who would you like from that portal, maybe in a Brian Harsin offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, it depends on who their offensive coordinator is. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen as of this morning anything about, we're 2 days away from the early signing period, anything about Mike Bobo's replacement. So I think part of that had to do with Bo Nix leaving too. I mean, it gets to a point at some point, like, you got to know, obviously the coordinator thing is a huge part for him, and him not knowing, I think it probably got to the point where he was like, I'm just going to take my chances somewhere else. So it's hard to say with Finley because I never felt like Bo Nix or TJ Finley were great fits for what Mike Bobo does offensively. A lot more drop back, a lot more, heavy personnel, pro style stuff. A lot more guys like me who can't move fit his system than the great athletes that Bo Nix and TJ Finley are. So it's really hard to say whether the best fit would be a high school kid, or I would imagine they'll add at least 2 kids, one being maybe from high school, one through the portal. But it's hard to say whether TJ Finley or really who's the best fit without knowing what type or who that offensive coordinator and what that system's going to look like.
Well, what do you think Bo Nix's future looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll get a lot of attention. I mean, I don't think he'll have a hard time finding a landing spot by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be in the SEC, and quite frankly, I don't even know if he wants to be in the SEC. If it's going to be in the SEC West, I think Bo Nix is a heck of a quarterback. I thought at times this year you could see where I think Mike Bobo really helped kind of his mechanics and his lower body. I thought he was trusting his protection more. I think sometimes, and I think this is the biggest thing you've got to you try to coach out of Bo, but at the same time, you don't want to coach out of him because he's got that ability to make you go, wow, how did you do that? But at the same time, he has that propensity to go, wow, why did you do that? And that's always the give and take when coaching quarterbacks is, sometimes he would take what would be a bad play and turn it into a catastrophe. And I think that's what you're always trying to kind of manage and coach with Bo, is that you don't want to coach that ability out of him all the way, because as we saw in the LSU game, I mean, he's got that ability to just go, oh my gosh, only 1% of guys can do that. But there are times where he takes a lot of sacks, hold on to the ball too long, doesn't trust his protection enough, and really just needs to continue to develop as a true, pocket thrower. And so where that looks like, I mean, I don't know. Like you said, there's so many different spots open and so many different quarterbacks in this portal now. I mean, Harrison Bailey at Tennessee is another one. It's just maybe some of these guys drop down a level and play at a Sun Belt or a MAC school somewhere.
You're not too far removed from your playing days. Is Mike Leach out of touch to publicly? I mean, I think a lot of people think it's selfish if you opt out of bowl games or do something like that, but it seems to be the world we live in. You're not too far removed from from your playing days, is Mike Leach out of touch? Should he publicly say things like that it's selfish to opt out?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that statement because is it selfish to take a job when your team's still in the college football playoff hunt? You know, and he didn't do that, but there's different cases every year where when coaches say things like this, they look like complete hypocrites. They look so tone deaf. So, you know, and I don't know Mike Leach's every career step to a T, but it just looks like, you know, after Brian Kelly left for Notre Dame, amongst a team who at that time still had a college football and a national championship chance, a slim one, but he left for LSU. And so I just thought, like, here's the nail in the coffin for the argument for anybody who ever bangs on players for sitting out of bowl games to preserve draft stock, because I mean, we've now, in my opinion, hit a new low in college football society when we've got coaches leaving with their team still having a chance to make not only the playoff, but still a national championship. So I like Mike Leach. I think he's fun for the sport. I think a lot of him is kind of a shtick, but I'm not a big fan of that comment.
He is Hutson Mason. Go follow him on Twitter at HMason14, the former Georgia quarterback, now an analyst with ESPN and the SEC Network, also on 680 The Fan there in Atlanta. Hutson, thank you for the time, man. It is always great talking.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Hey, you too, buddy. We'll see you in the new year. Hutson with us on the Pepsi Hotline.